Have you ever felt like you are not all that you were meant to be? We often feel like we are missing something, that there is a lack or deficiency within our beings. But what happens when society tries to rebuild us in its image without our consent? What sort of human might we become? On today's episode of the Live a Meaningful Story podcast, we're concluding our series on manhood with the sci-fi classic ROBOCOP. Despite its troubled production, this Paul Verhoeven-directed film went on to win an Academy Award for Best Special Effects and is regarded today as one of the most beloved 80s action films. But don't let the superhero antics fool you. This is a profoundly deep, often satirical commentary about our culture. And nearly 40 years later, its grisly predictions about consumerism and poignant critiques of corporate capitalism remain just as relevant today. But what lies at the heart of this story is not the metallic RoboCop. It is rather the flesh of a fragile man, one whose mind has been warped into a cyberpunk Frankenstein of what society deems a man should be, diligent but detached. How do we reclaim our souls from the bonds of soulless corporations? How do we heal our fractured humanity in a time when corporations want to outsource that humanity to technology? If you're ready and willing to buy that for $1, then let's examine the pieces that make up RoboCop. Welcome to the Live a Meaningful Story podcast, where we analyze stories and films that help us make sense of life. We are four friends with backgrounds in storytelling, filmmaking, teaching, and narrative therapy. Join us on our quest towards telling and living our stories more meaningfully. I'm Derek Hatch.
My name is Nick Natal.
Hello, everybody. I'm Joseph Wilson.
I'm Jason Lin.
All right, what's up, everybody? We are here live at the 80s Movie Club, and we just watched RoboCop.
I almost did the X-Men theme, but I forget that's 90s. So that would have been good.
So some of you guys, this was your first time ever seeing the movie, and some of us have seen it before, and we've got different people that are here that might be joining in the conversation. So you'll hear different people that'll just chime in and give their thoughts as we have a conversation. I mean, a couple people we got in the house. We got Mr. Will Mydock joining us. What's up?
What's up, everyone?
Oh, man. So you guys know that the four of us worked together, and Will was a part of that team as well. So good to have him here.
Part of it, part of the crew, part of the ship.
That's right. But he's
Will was the staples in the document, man.
Mm-hmm.
He's holding it together.
That's
Literally.
right. But he's not the only one. We also got, for the first time on this podcast,
The first time.
Mrs. Joseph Wilson, a.k.a.
Mrs.
Nancy.
Joseph Wilson. It's the Mrs. Joseph Wilson.
Now, as we dive into this, Nick, you've seen the movie before.
Mm-hmm.
Will, you've seen the movie before. I've seen the movie before. I brought my Criterion RoboCop DVD here today.
I didn't even know there was a Criterion version of it.
It's an
Isn't that awesome?
old school one.
That's
It's
crazy.
an old school. It's out of print. I found it on
not
eBay.
even a new one.
What's a DVD?
That's
What's
that's
For the
dope.
Gen Zer in the room, what's a DVD?
Dang, don't put Will down like that.
So I'm curious for you, Joe and Jason. This was your first time ever watching it. What was your initial impression?
Yeah,
boy.
literally.
It's fun.
I know of the movie, like I've seen clips of the movie. I kind of like know of the movie, but watching it for the first time is like, oh wow, people are really being blown up and shot down and gunned down.
Did you
Yeah.
expect it was going to be as violent as it was?
Yeah.
No,
but
I was
still-
impressed.
Yeah, but still seeing the violence is like,
Yeah.
that's fun.
Yeah.
See,
no,
I
this
knew
is-
it-
this is a cool movie.
Yeah.
I knew it was rated R, but I didn't know how crazy it was going to get. So I was just like threw it on with Tori one night and said, "Hey, we're going to watch this superhero movie, RoboCop. It's going to be fun."
Definitely not.
Yeah,
And-
let's say
and-
the fact you call it a superhero
There were no
movie.
heroes.
Yeah, I don't want to say there's no heroes.
He's pretty super.
Now you brought Nancy here as well. I mean, what did you think of it, Nancy?
I mean, it wasn't my cup of tea. Too much shooting, too much killing.
That is verbatim what Tori probably would say if she were here as well. Verbatim. Jason, what did you think of it?
I thought it was fun. I thought it was pretty satirical in a way that I enjoyed, in the way it talked about corporations and how things were becoming products and not something to serve the community.
Yeah.
The violence was fun.
Weird to
And,
kind of say, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it is just, I don't know.
It's
I was
art.
having a good time, but yeah, I've got more thoughts and
Okay.
they'll float up as we keep.
We'll get to
Cool.
corporations and systems and all
Oh,
that
yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
We'll dive deep.
Yeah.
I really like the actor too.
Oh, yes, Peter Weller.
Oh yeah, the way he was able to make himself move or kind of restrict himself to play the part, the lack of facial movement and just the control. I thought it was awesome.
Yeah.
I liked it.
I think he was a dancer or like a ballet performer
Yeah.
before he
Well,
took that role.
So
You can kind of tell with his walk because he made
they
up the walk.
didn't want him to play that role, or the director I don't think wanted him because
I'm glad you brought that up in general because the director intentionally went against the typecast for all these actors. So they're playing the exact opposites of the roles that they were known for at the time. The only reason why they actually got Peter Weller was because all the other actors they wanted were too bulky to actually fit in the RoboCop suit. So they had to pick someone that was skinny but could also be intimidating and could act with their jawline. And so that's what got him the part.
It would be a way different movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger
or somebody.
Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah,
it wouldn't be as serious.
Well, let's go ahead and do the letterboxed, and then we'll kind of dive into the context and get to this larger conversation of what these themes are. And of course, as always, spoiler alert. So if you have not seen RoboCop, please go check it out. At the time that we are recording this, it is on Max. You can always get it on DVD, rent it somewhere, and let's go ahead and dive into this now.
Letterbox.
Part man, part machine, all cop, the future of law enforcement. In a dystopic and crime-ridden Detroit, a terminally wounded cop returns to the force as a powerful cyborg, haunted by submerged memories. There's a lot of amazing backstory for RoboCop. So I'll give a few kind of highlight pointers here. So the producer for this story originally worked on Blade Runner. And that's kind of where he got this idea for RoboCop. And him and another writer, they drafted these scripts and they had a hard time really selling this. And so they couldn't really find a director. Kind of like when we talked about with Planet of the Apes, like a lot of people, a lot of studios, they just didn't take this concept very seriously. So Paul Verhoeven, he was very reluctant to direct this movie. He looked at the script and was like, nah, this is not my thing at all. Until his wife read the script and they got to the scene that we're going to really analyze later in the movie, the scene in the house when RoboCop goes back to his home. And his wife says, this movie it's not what you think it is. Like, this is something deep here. Like, this is like this Frankenstein, social commentary, and she kind of convinced him this is actually really worthwhile. And I think that's a good metaphor for the movie as a whole, because I know for me, for the longest time, I would see the Blockbuster VHS box when I was a kid, and I feel like, oh, that looks silly, and even as an adult just wasn't really interested in it. But when I watched it, I was really surprised at how much substance there is in this film, and that's why I'm really excited to dive into it. Now, another person that was here, who the host of the 80s Movie Club, Talia, brought up that the actor, Peter Weller, was losing weight. So much weight, in fact, that he was losing about 3 pounds a day just through sweat alone from being in that suit throughout the entire time of filming. And there was a lot of production issues. It was a huge disaster. Like, all those explosions that you saw, some of those explosions were uncontrolled, meaning that they went a lot harsher than they actually were meant to. So the fire department, I think they were filming in Texas, the fire department of that city actually tried to shut production down because buildings were catching on fire beyond what they were designated to actually blow up. And then on top of that, I mean, there was just constant back and forth arguments between the director and the production designers. Actors were having a hard time in these roles. It was really hot. There was a lot of pressure because this movie didn't have a huge budget. And as one guy brought up during the movie, they had to eventually just start filming scenes like the bathroom scene in order to just show that they actually were making a real movie. It just took so long for this thing to really get off the ground.
The production feels like the theme of this movie, to be honest, or just what's been happening like throughout it. Or the production feels like the themes of this movie, where it's just like it's all chaotic, like things are going out of control.
Yeah.
There are people trying to take things, put them into place, but it's still a oversee over this one, someone trying to speak over someone else, getting rid of certain people to try to fit the more vision of what they want the movie to be. So that's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Life imitates art.
It does. I think that's one of the themes that we see in a lot of these movies we end up talking about is just how much the story of the production is as much of the story of the film itself. A couple other fun facts before we actually start talking about the film itself. One thing that I think, Jason, somebody brought up during this is slice and dice.
Oh, that was Joe.
Oh
Or
yeah,
Joe,
Slice
is
and
that
Dice
you?
from Batman. Yeah.
Yeah.
Robin John.
What made you brought that up?
There are two criminals that were in the store and they're harassing the girl.
Yeah.
And just the way they were talking, it just sounded like, yeah, slice and dice. Let's go ahead.
Billy Berserk.
Yeah, Billy Bob. We got like that type of stuff. It literally felt like the Dark Knight type version where
Dark Knight Returns.
Dark Knight Returns, where everybody's going chaotic in the city.
So here's where it gets really interesting. So in 1986 is when Frank Miller comes out with Dark Knight Returns. And that's when RoboCop is in production. Same year. And RoboCop comes out in 1987. So even though we don't have a lot of record of Paul Verhoeven saying this, it's hard to deny that he's not pulling some inspiration from that story. You have, for example, these news segments that kind of break up the action. They actually, if you carefully look in RoboCop, the news sections are almost dividing up the acts of the story. Very similar to what Dark Knight Returns is doing, where they're using the media as commentary to kind of add supplement to what's going on. You also have the criminals, like what you just mentioned, like that kind of slice and dice. And then you even have the scene. This is where I think it's a shoo-in that he was pulling from this. You have a scene where RoboCop literally goes through the wall and pulls the guy out. And if you hold up the Dark Knight Returns, that scene where Batman does that, it's literally shot for shot the same thing. And as if that's not enough, Frank Miller went on to help pen the script for RoboCop 2 and 3.
Okay.
And Peter Weller, the guy who plays RoboCop, plays Batman in the Dark Knight Returns animated films.
Okay.
So there is
It's hard
some
to
sort
deny
of
that one.
synergy between them.
They're all hanging out together.
They are, for sure.
RoboCop kind of feels like Batman too, in a way.
Yes. Yeah.
Very much so.
Now, when we get to this setting here, you get to Detroit. There's this 80s urban crisis that's going on as the movie is being created. And there's this awareness that there's inequality that people in these cities like Detroit are experiencing. And so the movie takes place, I believe they said, do they actually say the year in the movie? Because I'm pretty sure it's in the late 90s, at least according to the production notes I was reading.
Future.
Yeah.
The future 90s?
Yeah, like
Futuristic type.
right, like
Yeah.
a decade or so after the actual time they were filming the movie. It's interesting because there really is this satire that is going on in this movie. There's a lot of satire. So what were some of the things that really stood out to you guys in terms of what they're saying, what they're commenting on in terms of culture, society?
The callousness towards life and death, definitely. With well, go get him, Frank. You got this. And then Frank dies.
Mm-hmm.
And a few seconds later. And also when RoboCop was, on and offline
Mm-hmm.
right after his creation, and they're having a celebration and they're kind of just mocking.
Mm-hmm.
And, oh, hey, he's looking at us. Hey, buddy, how you doing? And just a very callous disregard for life.
They really emphasize that in that first 20 minutes or so leading up to that moment, right? Like the news reporters are gleefully smiling as they're reporting on death and tragedy. You've got the EMT, the nurses, like the ER, and they're just kind of like, there's no emotion. I mean, which, like my wife's a nurse, so you got to kind of restrain that. But it's just kind of like, okay, let's call it here.
Yeah.
And the guy in the executive
Oh,
at
yes.
the table, he gets killed, and they're like, what do you think about
I'm so disappointed in you.
Yeah. They don't even talk about the guy that died. It's just like, okay, you failed this assignment. Come on, bro. What are you doing?
The one guy goes, what do you think of him? And he just says, it's life in the city.
Yeah.
Just brushed aside, whatever.
Just gone.
That's how it is. Anyways.
It's a whole roll, no blanket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what they're programming.
That's what the crazy dude on TV basically says.
Let's talk about
Yeah, man, you know. He basically said cold world, no blanket.
Yeah.
It's the jungle.
What is it, Law of the Jungle?
It's life in the jungle.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
That was the guy from Stranger Than Paradise.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. That's Florida Man from
Same
Stranger
guy in
Than
different
Paradise.
forms.
That's him.
Different forms.
I wish I could remember what that guy says now.
Hey, didn't Stranger Than Paradise come out in like 86?
84.
Or 84?
Oh,
Okay.
Wait, what's that guy?
Oh man.
Not a lot of connections other than that guy between these two movies.
Just him.
Oh man. So yeah, you have RoboCop it's almost recreated in that image to be that very stoic, detached sort of figure. Because the cops, the way they're presented in the movie, they're actually, when we see them, there's actually some emotion that we see there, right? We see there's something stirring about a strike. Cops keep getting killed, and the sergeant comes in and has that very somber tone, hope you show up at the funeral. And they're kind of pressing it down. They're kind of pushing these emotions down. Now, it's interesting because my dad was a police officer. So there's a lot of interesting things about my relationship with my dad that I see through that tension between like pushing down those emotions. But at the same time, police officers can be some of the most emotional people you ever meet. But it's when that comes out and you see that it kind of starts to bubble up. And RoboCop, they want somebody that can't strike. Like, as in, like, someone that's not going to, like, need pay, benefits, someone that's not going to protest if, cops are getting killed.
You just
somebody,
eat baby food.
Yeah, it doesn't need
No, he's
food.
just a-
literally
Yeah.
eats baby
sleep,
food.
No sleep, just always works.
Yeah.
Always listens and obeys.
The baby food's funny though. I was wondering if it's because he's like a baby now. He's being reborn, and they're just feeding him like baby food to start his life over.
Yeah.
Just a bare minimum that they can do too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the point you're bringing up, but I think it's interesting that I don't think anyone actually wanted RoboCop except for the executives because they wanted someone to control.
Yes.
No one else wanted RoboCop,
Yeah.
and because they wanted his emotion. It's
Yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah, that's a great point. They want something almost in their image. We talked about this before on the podcast. Like when we create in our own image. And that's kind of like what the Frankenstein stories are, for better or for worse, like with Tony and Ultron, for example, in that Avengers movie. And now you see it here too, that the corporations, they want somebody that's just going to reflect, what their ideals, what their values are, all that good stuff.
So what I saw, what you guys are talking about, is a theme of having a solution based on profitability, but not based on need, because there was a real disconnect between the humanity that was in need of a solution versus the profitability that they were offering. So they were like, oh, we could make money on this solution, as this solution. And then the core theme, like you were talking about, of humanity and the lack thereof, to me, it was like a masculine feminine balance. And so I thought that the women who were in the film, including, it wasn't Murphy, I forget the
Lewis?
Yes, Lewis. She was so interesting as a character.
Yeah.
Because she was putting forward the humanity, that sort of feminine. And I also noticed that there was like this battle weariness. And what happens when you see crime consistently, when you see problems consistently, you see all of the behavior that was expressed, including the lack of humanity that was shown in the doctors and in others. It's like because they've seen it so many times. So it was sort of the repeat over and over again. So that was an interesting pattern.
Oh my gosh, that is so good because Lewis is such a subtle character in this movie. And she really is that humanity. And as we're going to talk about later, like she's the one that really reconnects RoboCop to his humanity.
She's our conduit in order to relate to him.
Yes.
She brings our focus to his humanity as a point of empathy. Showing us what we can do that all the other people in the film and all the other people in his life aren't doing. Bringing our attention to his manhood.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she is really the only one that is trying to bring the light to that. Like saying, hey, this is your name. This is pretty much giving him his identity back.
Right.
She was the one that's bringing that back.
Yeah.
That battle weariness you were talking about, I was wondering what's his name? RoboCop's name? Murphy, when he dies the first time, when all the criminals are killing him, that's when he loses his humanity. Like that was a metaphor for just the crime in the city taking his soul. Because the thing that stuck out to me with the film is that's the first time he gets shot by a group of people, and the next time he gets shot is by the corporation.
Right.
He's out of the elevator, and they're trying to kill him. He almost dies like twice in the film. He dies first with his humanity, and then he dies as a robot again by the corporation that killed him.
Well, those are the fellow officers that are shooting at him too. Like that's his own beat.
Well, it just, it makes a point earlier in the movie to mention that the OCP, that's the company, which is, obviously an anagram for the word cop. So the OCP owns the police. A corporation owns, a part of the government. And of course, the corporation is going to act in its best interest. We've talked about this, before, that corporations, once they get to a certain point, they only exist to protect themselves, right? And it's easy for them to lose sight of their mission. And so you have here, even in the scene that we mentioned earlier in the boardroom, where Dick Jones, awesome name for a bad guy, by the way. Awesome. On so many levels.
Not a lot of subtlety in this.
No.
Richard.
So he creates the Ed 209, right? He creates his version of what he thinks RoboCop should be. And obviously, despite the fact that it kills, a member, it doesn't just kill a random person. It doesn't just kill a criminal. It kills a pretty important member of that company. But it shows how the companies just see people as disposable, as dispensable, right? And it's that lack of humanity, that dehumanizing that's coming in here. And that's more of the dystopia that really is eerie to me than anything else in terms of the technology. Yeah.
So that brings up an overall theme that I see in the film, which is the idea of cognitive dissonance. The idea that, like, as you were mentioning, the second time he's killed, it's in a betrayal by his own people because they have bought into this concept.
Yeah.
That maybe they don't see it this way, but it's the profit is more important. The company is more important. Following orders is more important.
Yeah.
So it's that parable.
Yeah. And
they buy into it without even really thinking about it.
Well, it's important to note as well that the corporations aren't acting alone. They've actually are in alignment with the Clarences of the world. But by the way, I just got to say, Clarence, Kurtwood Smith, he's got to be one of my new favorite villains.
You mean
Red Foreman. So I grew up watching that 70s show, and when I found out he was the bad guy, I'm like, I'm sold. And oh my gosh, he is so good in this movie because when it really comes right down to it, he's kind of like this weasel. We see him when he's very vulnerable, but he puts on this kind of also
persona.
This persona of like, I'm the one in charge, but we really see that he's also come under the corporation, and the corporation has taken control of even the most basic street level crime of drugs, gambling, prostitution. And so there's this weirdness where there's a mess that's being made in society, all this crime that's run by the Clarences, but the corporation needs that because they are the saviors. They are the ones that are going in and getting the money to clean it up. So there's this weird, very toxic relationship that exists there.
It's funny enough, I was just thinking of the Decepticons, like how the corporation are like Decepticons, how Jason said in the other podcast, how there's no unity within a corporation. Everyone is just trying to climb over each other. Even with the drug lords, everyone's just climbing over each other.
Throwing each other out of the ship.
Yeah, just throwing. Yeah. Starscream just throwing.
That was the guy dying from the Ed 9000.
Yeah.
Starscream puts the crown on just to get blasted again by Megatron come back.
That's the giant robot, yeah.
Ed 209's got some Transformers vibes to him.
He does have a little bit of Transformer vibes. I wish he turned into a giant robot. That should have been in a sequel.
I am fine with him falling down the stairs and screeching.
My one weakness.
Which is awesome because
so
that is Dick Jones's hubris, is that despite the fact that it didn't work the first time, he's like, oh, it's determined to work. And one of the most basic things you could think of,
downstairs.
it just
dare.
Well, it was interesting about the like screeching noises, and one of the things
Like the pig squeals.
I always love to watch a movie. I watch every movie regardless of what language it's in. I watch it with the subtitles on because you sometimes catch things that you wouldn't normally catch.
Yeah.
I also think that must be a really fun job to write those subtitles because they used growling and screeching as examples. So it was adding this level of vulnerability or like just gut instinct to these objects that don't emote. There's no emotion involved, but they made them very vulnerable when they were, grunting and growling and of course squealing when they were, on the stage. The other thing I wanted to mention was about the villain. It was really interesting when Murphy plugs in to find information about the villain and they read the rap sheet and it was all lower level offenses. And I thought to myself, this guy has come up through the ranks. And he's really made it because now he's like the chief villain.
Right.
Because he's done all of these, like, I don't want to say that they're not important crimes, but, everything.
Like petty crimes,
rape, all these different things that, like, he had to physically do himself.
Yeah.
Right? He wasn't the boss back then. He did all of these things. And yet he's now at the top. I thought it was a really telling scene at the end. Well, when he's in Dick's office and he sits down after they have their little altercation, they have a meeting of the minds and now they're both on the same page and he sits down and he's like, Clarence, Richard, it's like they've come to terms, like they're being allowed to play on the same field now as they're equals, but it has to do with the profitability. It has to do with, as long as you're fine with everyone else being less than you, because he can be above it.
Because in a way, he's almost just as callous as Dick Jones is with his people. When Dick Jones's guy dies in the boardroom, oh well. When Clarence, so the first scene with Clarence, if you want to parallel them together, we have one of my favorite lines in the movie. Can you fly, Bobby? Because I
put that down in my notes. That is a very funny line.
Yeah, because you have one of Clarence's guys, Bobby, and just throws his body out to try to get a getaway. Yeah. So instantly it puts them on the same playing level, that they are willing to sacrifice their own team members for the sake of moving and advancing forward.
Burnt money. For burnt money.
For burnt money. Yes.
Well, like their focus is money and product.
Yeah.
And even Dick says, you're our product.
Yes.
You were a regular cop. We can't have product turning on ourselves, can we?
Yeah, it's almost like what Talia was saying about animals, about them almost being treated at that level. Because when you look at how he's talking to RoboCop, it's almost like he's a dog. Well, like, good job, boy. Yep, go get him. Like that kind of language.
Well, I'm thinking about now what she said about Ed, and Ed is basically an animal.
Yeah.
Just the screeching and the growling and all that stuff. That's basically what they created, just an animal and soulless. And that's why RoboCop is different. Mm-hmm. They tried to make him into that, but the dream that humanity kept gnawing at him.
Yeah.
Lewis kept gnawing at him.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the Matrix. He was waking up to the reality of, instead of being put into this false world that they wanted him to be in as a product, because that's what the machines were doing in the Matrix, using them as batteries. So back to the products.
How the humanity plays a role into it. Near the beginning of the movie, there's a commercial. There's lots of commercials in this movie. Some are absolutely hilarious, like the 6,000 sucks and oh man.
Sucks. You mean SUX?
This is the first time I heard sucks. I was always saying SUX.
Yes.
It's very. He does that again a decade later in Super Troopers.
Right.
Would you like to learn more? Would you like to know more?
Starship Troopers. Yes. One of the commercials that really stood out to me this time was about the heart. So there's a corporation that basically can build you a new heart. Something that when we think of the human heart, this thing that's of flesh, that's created by divinity, by God, and corporations are now trying to give life. Again, that Frankenstein analogy here. And so in thinking about what they want to do with RoboCop, they're trying to replace the heart of man with steel. It's actually the reverse of that verse in Ezekiel, where it says that I'll take your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. I'll soften your heart. I'll bring you deeper into your humanity. This is the opposite. This is taking the heart of flesh and making it a heart of stone. And we don't know too much about Murphy before that happens. But one thing that really stands out about him is that he's living in the shadow of something. So we see that he's twirling his gun, and we see that there's something that he's trying. You know, it's his first day of being a police officer, and what a terrible first day. Right. But when he's dying, you know, his life is flashing before his eyes. And so what are those really important moments that Paul Verhoeven wants us to see, that he sees? And it's his son. And did you guys catch what his son was saying in those flashbacks?
What, Dad, can you do that or something
can
like
you,
that?
yeah.
Can you do that?
Can you be like that? Can you do that?
Even when Lewis was talking to Murphy before they're heading off, they're talking about, why are you doing that? Are you trying to, what's it called? Like inspire like the boys or something like that? And he was like, every boy needs a role model.
Yes.
So stuff like that, showing and tying into what he's really trying to do.
And this is one area where the film personally hits me a lot, is he sees his son watching something, which is basically a consumer product on the TV, and he's comparing his father to it. Not like in a mean way, but just in a very innocent, childlike way. Can you do that? And he, of course, wants to be that. He wants to live up to that in some way. We don't know too much about why he's a cop and how he got into that, but I don't think it's an accident that that's what we're shown. We're also shown that there's some conflict with his wife going on, where she has, you know, as again, his life is flashing before his eyes on the operating table. Oh, there's almost like an aggressiveness in how she's talking to him in the bedroom in that flashback there. And so there's some tension going on about his manhood and about the role that he's taken. We don't get much, but we do get a glimpse of it. I don't know. I think just for me as a father, I mean, comparison it's so easy to fall into that comparison trap and to try to compare yourself to other men that, you know, your kids see, even to what they see on TV, and knowing that in some ways you're never going to be like that. You're never going to compare to that. The weird irony is that when he becomes RoboCop, he becomes this mythic thing, like what his son admires. The father's gone. Like Murphy's not there anymore, at least in the beginning when RoboCop's there. He's just echoing these empty corporate platitudes: serve the public trust, protect the innocent, uphold the law. His voice is very robotic. There's no heartbeat there.
There is something that remains, and just to impress his son, that wasn't the only reason that he was doing it.
Yeah,
right.
I was going to bring it up too. I'm glad you're doing it.
Yeah, so he says that, you know, every boy needs a role model to look at, and then there's a pause, and he goes, look, I get a kick out of it, all right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that's very human, is novelty. And
yes.
He does it because it's cool. Like, it's fun.
Yeah.
But that persists, and that stays.
Mm-hmm.
Even when he is becoming just, you know, a mirror of the corporations and what they want as a product, that still remains in him. And that's still echoing, and it's there the whole time. Like, that's how Lewis notices at first that that's still Murphy.
Yeah. You're talking the gun twirling, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so just novelty, fun, like doing something just because you can, because it's cool. That is something that part of humanity that stays in there.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's just novelty either, because I remember the Fight Club episode when we were talking about, like, there's parts of us that actually want to fight.
Yeah.
There's parts of us that want to engage in that. And there's parts of him in the movie that want to be a hero. Mm-hmm. And that's in, I think, men in general.
Yeah.
And I don't think the movie outright says that that's a bad thing, because he that part of him stays there, and that's how he's recognized.
Right.
So it's this kind of like edge of how far do you go until you become a machine rather than a human.
Yes.
And I think that's really, like, when we were watching it, Derek was like, this is the most important part of the movie. And I think it is that, why are you doing this? Because my son looks up to it, but then also because I like it too.
Yeah.
Well, that's an essential part of humanity, is this idea of like natural curiosity. You're not going to find that in a robot or an android or any of those things. And in fact, I thought there was a parallel to that in a sense with the son's magical thinking. I mean, I was guessing that the son is about 10 years old.
Yeah.
And not to sound too much like a psychologist, but that's about the time that children between 10 and 12 tend to grow. They're growing out of magical thinking. Like, oh, my dad could be that guy. Could you do that thing? TJ Laser, he's so cool. Like, my dad could do that.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting with the magical thinking. And then just this idea of like innocence and the quirky, fun thing with the twirling of the gun. And, you know, that's human. That's completely human. That's something that other, you know, animals and robots don't.
And isn't it incredible that even when they tear the flesh off, even the arm, they're like, oh, we got to get rid of the arm. They make him into this RoboCop, and they want him to be this, you know, stoic, cold, ruthless, determined version of man that I think sometimes in our society, a lot of people expect of men. But even underneath that exterior, there is everything that you guys are describing. It's still there. And that's really where this film comes into focus for me, is the journey of slowly peeling back the machinery and being able to see the humanity of someone whose humanity has been stripped away from them.
As interesting as I'm thinking of that, and I think of what he says right before he takes off his mask. All right, you might not like what you see.
Yeah.
When the mask comes off for all of us and our flaws are exposed and the humanity is there, you might not like what you see. And that's uncomfortable truth, but that's how it is.
Well, it's interesting too that the face is the human part that's left of him.
Yeah.
Because, you know, there's a sense that we connect with people through faces, through the eyes. And you see that even that shot where the fight out with the police officers, the shootout, and I think, is that where it is? Or it might be a little beforehand where his eye, in the parking garage, where his eye, you start to see that glimmer of his soul that's coming out there again. But before I go to that, I want to back up for a moment and go back to the scene in the house, because this is the scene for me where, again, if this is what the director made this movie just so he can make this scene, basically. Like, if you listen to him, like this is really crucial to understanding it. When he walks into the house, every single moment, every single frame shot of this scene means something. I'm not going to break it all down, but there's a few I want to point out here. So, Talia, we got a realtor in the house, and the first thing you see is on the TV, you have the realtor saying, "Welcome, shopper. Let's take a look at your new family home." How was that for you?
I was thinking at the time, people always talk about realtors and how, like, maybe we're not necessary, and, you know, in our profession, we talk a lot about, it's the same thing in the nonprofit sector, okay? You can't remove the humanity out of it, because if you do, the person on the other end, the client, right, the buyer, is never going to get their needs met.
Yeah.
And I was really excited at the end when he smashed the monitor with the guy saying, like, "Oh, you want to make an offer?"
Yes.
Like, that's not how you do it. One of the other interesting things, as we talked about the scene, it was the only scene that was completely clean. It was very white. There was a lot of brightness. Even the parts of the scene that weren't white, some of the charred things, the dying and dead plants, that was all, to me, very purposeful. That was in there because obviously showing that it was no longer in use.
Right.
He could have chosen to show that by just having the house be devoid of items, but he chose to put charred photographs. He chose to put a dying plant in there. I mean, that was perfect.
Well, and the back and forth, because his memories are flashing to him, and they're juxtaposing with what he's seeing there. So when he gets to the house, he's searching for something. And when these memories, like static, they come in and out, but he remembers his son in front of the TV. So we saw that earlier when he was dying. Can you do that, Dad? So that anchor is there. There's a mug that he walks by that says "world-class husband," but it clearly has been broken, chipped.
World's greatest dad,
Yeah. So then there's a Polaroid of them at Halloween, and you see that he's like racing to take the picture real quick. I've been trying to think about, maybe anyone can jump in on this. I'm trying to think of, like, okay, the son is dressed up as a devil. Why is the son dressed up as a devil? Why is the wife stabbing a pumpkin? Because she's not quite carving it, but she is just kind of, I'm like, why is she just stabbing? I'm not sure. Does anyone want to take a stab, pun intended, of like what's going on in that?
She may literally have just not done that before and not known how to do that before, but memory is a tricky thing.
Oh,
And
okay.
Right? And
Yeah.
we interlace certain things. We remember certain things. Just like one of the most poignant scenes while he's in the house is the wife at first, when he first remembers it, it's negative. It's a negative experience. And then when he really remembers it, it's like, I have something really important to tell you. And then she's like, I love you.
Yes.
So it's forgetting that relationship.
That's cool. It could be that she's stabbing the pumpkin. It's kind of resembling crime and how crime is distorting his memories. So like the criminals are killing people and this lovely memory is now like transfused with, corrupted.
Oh,
So
that's
pretty cool.
interesting. Yeah.
The devil was like kind of stabbing his pitchfork at him.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
attacking him. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's good. That's good. See, I knew we'd figure it out together.
I mean, like the whole time he's kind of just like looking for crime. He's looking for negative in his surroundings. So the first thing he's going to look for is negative things, negative memories. Like,
Yeah. Oh, that's so
Very
good
cool.
there. That's so good. And it seems like there's this conflict, even when he's on the operating table. It seems like I would need to go back to see it again. Maybe someone else can chime in on this, but it seems like the take between how the wife says, like, I have something important to tell. It doesn't seem like it's even the same take. Like I was like, she's not quite saying it the same way either way. So it does seem like the fragileness of memory, which is a huge part of being human. Like we talked about this in the After Sun episode. That is actually, ironically, part of him reclaiming his humanity is working through that fragileness.
One of the things I wanted to mention was one of the things that makes us inherently human until recently is that we believe that we are the only ones that dream. We're the only entity on Earth that dreams.
Yeah.
At the time that this movie was made, that's what we believed.
Right.
We know that's not the case now, but that I think is a poignant thing that also like is another reason to hint at that and to make that part of it.
Yeah.
Because it's his humanity.
And even the thing that woke him up to his humanity wasn't the dreams. It was a nightmare. It was a nightmare about the guys that killed him.
Yes.
That's what activated him.
Yes.
Not those innocence, those precious memories. It was a complete shock of the system, like a sense of revenge.
It was trauma.
Yeah. It was
Yeah.
trauma reactivating them.
Oh, that's, yeah. And what do you guys think the significance is of like him walking through his wife? But he shot it in such a way to where he walks through her and then it's clean. Everything is clean and clear.
I think it may have been because he wanted to be close to her, but he also didn't know if he wanted to be close to her. He like wanted the feeling in the memory.
Yeah.
He was not 100% sure. And then by the time he didn't even have a choice to figure out his feelings, he realized it was already too late.
Yeah.
If I don't remember the scene, but if he walks through her and then everything's clean, the apartment's white, it sounds like when yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
When he enters into love or he enters into that part of himself, then things become clean.
Yeah, that clarity. And then that's when the voice on the TV, as Talia mentioned earlier, the voice comes back on and says, well, have you thought it all over? And then he smashes it. I mean, this movie's awesome. We are just watching this guy wrestling with his identity, and this movie about a guy transformed into a robot is so human. What, Nick?
Laughing because of our conversation about Inside Llewyn Davis.
Oh, no.
No, but seriously, because it is a movie about a guy wrestling with his identity and you hate it. But when it's put in a story with like this sci-fi bent and this robot, you love it. It's just unique. That's all. That's why I'm laughing, because it's so unique.
There are plenty of realistic movies like Llewyn Davis that I enjoy. I just don't like the character of Llewyn Davis. That's it. That's all it is. I knew you were gonna go there.
Well, you're watching in the film. You're watching somebody go through an existential crisis.
Yeah,
but you see it from the lens of like he doesn't even have the ability to think, "Am I human?" Because he began as a human, so he's not fully reborn in either way. He's not fully human. He doesn't fully transform into a robot, and he also doesn't fully transform back into being human.
He was transformed into a new man.
Yeah. He's trapped almost between the binaries. And I think one of the most brilliant, I mean, I hate to jump ahead here, but this is really good here, what you brought up, Talia, because I think the movie acknowledges that tension literally in the last moment. So as he's reclaiming his humanity, we start to see that he is more and more accepting who he is. And in the final moment, when the president of the company asks him, "What's your name?" he says, "Murphy." And then immediately after,
Credits.
He smiles.
before
RoboCop.
credits, it says RoboCop. So right there, you hear Murphy, you see the face, but also the myth, the title, because that's the weird irony of the movie is that they're not going to call this movie Murphy. We've talked about, with
Logan,
like Logan or like how would it be different if we named a movie this?
Well, RoboCop's the split of both of them.
Yeah.
So he's not Murphy. He's not a robot. It's this combination of this new creation.
Right.
Also, something I noticed is this is the first time he smiles
Yeah.
since he got turned into RoboCop.
Yeah.
Yeah, he becomes RoboCop when he smiles.
Just like Iron Man, Tony Stark.
Yeah.
We'll
He
understand.
finally realized.
The symbiotic relationship, let's say, between Murphy and his new body. I thought it was a really interesting choice that the director made to keep his face very pure, very clean. I mean, he had when you first see him be killed, the back of his head
And blowing out.
Yeah.
goes off. And obviously the bullet enters through the front, but they almost like left this bullet piece
Yeah.
over the front of it, and then he's like cleaned up. And I thought that was a really interesting choice to be made, because if you think about it, if we wanted to see him as this gritty human, he would have had like a slash, or he would have had the extra kinds of
Deadpool style.
yes,
Yeah.
Or a
Dirt,
bad eye,
scars,
or whatever else. But the director made a conscious decision to keep his face purely human. And
Yeah.
I thought that was a really interesting choice, because when he lifts off the mask, it truly is just completely a human face.
Yeah.
It's his original intention. So it made his smile at the end feel so much more poignant.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you were able to read his entire face.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
I have a question, because I'm trying to remember. After the house scene, does he have any more memories of his wife and son? Or he does ask Lewis what happened to him, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
He does.
I'm just kind of asking it for myself, because I watched the scene over real quick.
Yeah.
And after he remembers taking the picture, he sees the photo in his hand and he crumbles it. And then he sees his wife in the flashback and then walks through her.
Yeah.
And it's
Well,
almost
it's 'cause
like,
it's
is he
almost-
throwing it away. Like,
No, I think it's painful for him. I think there's some pain in him reliving that memory. And it's when he walks through the wife, based on what you guys are saying, I think it's him accepting. So we're literally watching, and the scene's only like 2.5 minutes long, but in 2.5 minutes, we're watching like a journey
I
unfold.
kind of want to rewatch the scene to see if he's going through the stages of grief.
Oh,
if
yeah.
that's what that scene actually is. Not gonna actually.
Yeah, if there's denial, anger, fear. Yeah.
And also, it felt like a dark night of the soul.
Yes.
Felt like man's walkabout, in the desert, and he comes through it transformed, which is that scene where he walks through his wife. The other thing that comes up when we watch that scene with his wife, and maybe it's just because I did a virtual reality walkthrough today. When you watch a film like this through a modern lens, there are so many things that you think you reflect on it as though it were today.
Yeah.
So that to me felt like a moment of virtual reality when you walk through a scene and it, blurs out. Or in the beginning, how it would have been a completely different choice rather than having the robot. It would have been some kind of, scare tactic that had to do with AI or some kind of integration.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
We'll get right back to the conversation in just a moment. One of my favorite parts of RoboCop is near the end when, after he's just defeated Clarence, RoboCop goes to the boardroom and confronts Dick Jones. Now, the writing in the movie, if you follow it closely, it teases that there's this hidden fourth directive of RoboCop that's programmed into him, and we don't know what it is. But then the twist that's revealed when he tries to confront Dick Jones the first time is that he cannot turn against any leader in the company. And then it's not until the president can issue those awesome words, "Dick, you're fired," that he's able to do something about it. And so if you pay attention to RoboCop, you can see how there's an intentionality about how the story gets told. And good writing leads to a satisfying experience for the audience. Now, how many of you out there have been in a position where you've been asked to share your story? Maybe it's through speaking, maybe it's through writing, maybe it's something at your company, and you didn't quite know what to say. You weren't sure what stories to tell and where you wanted to go and the journey that you wanted to take your audience on. Well, if you implement good tools of writing and storytelling, it's amazing how people will still be talking about your story long after you tell it, because you find ways that make it memorable, that make every moment in the story intentional as it's building up and leading to the next thing. And so if you want to learn how to do that, that's what we do at All Things Narrative. We help you to become a better storyteller through our coaching, through our workshops, and of course, through this podcast, as you get to learn more about storytelling through these examples of amazing storytellers in film. And so if you want to learn more about how to do this for your personal story and even begin the journey of getting guidance on how to do that so that you can better connect with your audience through your story, then check out allthingsnarrative.com right here in the description. And when you go on our website, you'll see that if you sign up for our email list, you can get a free copy of the bonus podcast episode that we have not released publicly, 5 Tips to Improve Your Storytelling. And I guarantee that by implementing these 5 tips, you will be well on your way to getting more clarity about how to communicate your story. All you need to do is go in the show notes to allthingsnarrative.com and sign up for that mailing list, and you will be well on your way towards becoming a better storyteller. And now, back to the conversation. So, as we're wrapping up, are there any kind of final things that you guys wanted to mention or talk about this movie?
I definitely think that corporations should own different police departments around
That's the takeaway, right?
I think that would be a really good idea for that to be, part of the public sector.
That is like, to go back to Fight Club, right? Remember where he's saying the corporations are going to own everything, Planet Starbucks, like that whole monologue there. And it's, I feel like in 2024...
they're in real estate.
Mm-hmm.
So we dropped the Black Rock bomb. Yeah, so now this podcast will get canceled and pulled from the air.
Since we're being canceled.
We're just going to let it out.
Basically, everything you wrote, everything you put on your phone that didn't make it.
Right.
There's another 80s movie called Say Anything.
Yeah, I've heard of Say
where John Cusack actually an ad-libbed, completely improvised scene, which is like one of the most poignant of any of his films, including that one.
Yeah.
And he basically says, I don't want to have a job where I own anything. He goes on this long diatribe about how he doesn't basically want to be a cog in the wheel. He doesn't want to hurt anyone with anything that he does. And it's a similar kind of scene of him embracing his humanity.
Yeah.
And so it kind of, some of the scenes in this film kind of reminded me of that. Just understanding the place that we have, in humanity. And he was coming to terms with that as he came out of just being a faceless, robot.
And this is why art is so important, because so many of these movies, time and time again, we talk about, they're not just fun entertainment. They are that. But they're also, they have something to say. You don't spend, millions of dollars on something unless you really want to say something. And with the nightmarish hell that RoboCop was to create, this movie took years just to get greenlit to be made. Clearly, they believed that there was something in here that was for us today. And so that's my final question for anyone who wants to jump in here is, with RoboCop and with this idea of us, living a meaningful story, what is the connection there? How do these themes, these ideas that you see in RoboCop, how do they inspire, or how do they challenge, or how do they move you? Whether it's the way you think, whether it's the way you act in the world. Yeah, I'd just love to hear anyone chime in on that.
So there was a piece that you had mentioned how, being a father and being concerned with being able to meet the imaginative thoughts that your son or your child would want you to like aspire to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that an individual should take into consideration is that a kid will say they want, a parent to be something, or can you do that particular thing? But RoboCop became that particular thing.
Yeah.
And everybody was either afraid of it or wasn't sure. And so it's like, it makes you think like, okay, even though people are thinking, hey, this is a great idea, or this is a great creation or product that we should create, we might want to think twice.
Mm-hmm.
And really think it through and say, hey, what are truly the pros and the cons of if this particular thing becomes actual?
Yeah.
Before it becomes actual, and now we're dealing with what those cons and those pros are in real life.
I think there's a lot of people out there, Nancy, that need to take a page from that book that you're speaking from. I think when it comes to technology and it comes to all the different things we're seeing and people praising that like AI is going to save the world and this is going to do that.
It can also be with that.
I think there needs to be if there's anything that these sci-fi dystopian movies are warning about, because we're going to get to Blade Runner eventually.
It's interesting because media in this film is in a way also like the cops who in the end shoot RoboCop, right? They're just part of the story, man. They're just doing their job.
Yeah.
And it's very much like that in They Live, because the media is also the mouthpiece of the people who are in charge.
I like Starship Troopers better.
When you were talking about when you were talking about the media, that reminds me of Starship Troopers as well, because the media is very heavily involved in that and persuading the youth to want to join this system or the cogs in the wheel. I feel like kind of like how RoboCop is too, but they're not really selling a product in that movie. They're more so they're selling their citizenship and stuff like that. But we should do that movie too. I feel like that'd be a good movie to
it's
do.
funny because I think RoboCop, Total Recall, and Starship Troopers are almost formed like a thematic trilogy of what Paul Verhoeven is trying to say as a whole. At least that's what I've heard.
What exactly is he trying to say? So, like, really thinking about the movie and what Nancy said. So when he becomes that guy with the laser, he started out wanting to be a cop and wanting to like be that kind of example.
Yeah.
He doesn't, I think that was him with the laser, but then he becomes a machine. And society made him into a machine and takes his humanity away. And then he goes through this journey to become human again. But where does he finish? Because he finishes still as a machine. He says Murphy, but he's Murphy and the machine. The movie's called RoboCop. So I'm kind of confused that where the director actually lands here and what he's trying to say.
So he's like a Venn diagram, right? He's like part human. He's also part robot. And so he's kind of in the middle.
So is that what he's saying society makes us? We start to get created into these part human, part machine
that's part of the
creations?
Yeah, that's part of the compromise, I think.
So growing up with a dad who was a police officer, I saw how difficult that was in terms of how little he talked about what he saw and what he did and the different roles that he had over the years and that shutting off of emotion. Because for a long time, it was hard for me to see my dad as a very emotional, like capable of emotions. And then it's interesting because as I got older, I felt like I started to see more and more range of emotions. And it didn't change the fact that he was in that role. It didn't change the fact that he was still a police officer. Because of some things that were happening personally with us as a family, I was seeing more and more of his humanity coming in those last few years that he was a police officer. And I think that's maybe what Verhoeven might be trying to say, is that society tries to turn us into something, tries to mold us into a certain image. And I don't know the reasons fully why my dad became a police officer. I don't know fully all that stuff. But what I do know is that despite him being in that role and the fact that that did not change, I did see him change as a person. and not become the detached, soulless, emotionless, stereotypical what a cop is with a family. But I saw him become something greater. And I saw him grow into being a father more and more. And unfortunately, Murphy has lost his family and doesn't get to do that. But maybe we can watch RoboCop, and when we can really take a sober look at how we are being conditioned, how we are being molded by society, and reclaiming our humanity back.
I think part of, as I alluded to before about the idea of masculine and feminine and a balance.
Thank you.
It's a very masculine trait to compartmentalize, right? And much of what you talked about your father doing is something that occurs quite often with men in many different, industries. The person who you are at work is very different from the man that you are at home, that kind of thing. So it was really interesting to see how that plays out as you were asking about the end of the movie. Where is he? He's less compartmentalized.
I was just gonna say, it sounds like then when he says Murphy, it's that small integration is a sign of hope. Yeah. That it's still there for anyone who have experienced it or is losing their humanity, that sign of hope is in that moment.
Despite how chaotic and dystopian the world gets. And what you said about the feminine, like with Fight Club, we had Marla is the healthy touch of the feminine that the narrator at the end of the movie, that the narrator reconciles with. Not any time before that, but at the very end of the movie, that's what he needs to kill Tyler Durden. Then in Holdovers, with Mary. Mary is the one who brings the feminine touch to the relationship between Paul and Angus.
Feminine and motherly touch.
And I think in the same way, Lewis acts as that conduit for the feminine, because it is when we are in touch with the inner self, that journey.
By what you guys are saying, and I'm thinking when he smiles and says Murphy, like he's regained and is holding on to his identity between what's, what they tried to make him into, like the super stoic expectations of him. His identity is zeroed in now, finally. And he's found the middle ground. And I think that's something I'm going to be taking into my life and kind of this.
It's almost the reverse journey of Logan, where Logan is the broken man who has to become the mythic thing. This is someone who the mythic Wolverine, right? And we see that at the end of the movie. The end of Logan deals with him embracing that. RoboCop is the opposite. He's thrust into this mythic identity of RoboCop, and he has to go backwards. He has to get the humanity back.
He's doing it on his terms. And I think that must be where that smile and that smirk comes from, because essentially that's a choice.
Yeah. Well, guys, this has been really, really fun. Talia, thank you for having us here and for doing RoboCop, letting us come and crash the 80s movie club here. And this is such a great movie. So if you're still listening at this point and you, for some reason, have not checked out RoboCop, just be warned, it is a very violent movie. If you haven't gotten that
the director's cut is extra gore.
Grade A practical effects.
It's fun.
Nancy liked
Jason
it.
It's rated R though.
She's shaking her head, but she liked it.
That's the true test.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Live a Meaningful Story podcast. We will be back next month with a brand new theme, kind of building off RoboCop here. Our theme is going to be Lost Justice, and we are going to be talking about the Godfather films with a professional screenwriter. So stay tuned for that, and until next time.
And remember, we care.
Thank you for listening to the Live a Meaningful Story podcast, produced by All Things Narrative. If you'd like to learn more about our coaching, workshops, events, please check out allthingsnarrative.com. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at All Things Narrative. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and tune in next time as we continue exploring the stories we love and the stories we live. Take care.